Hello, good evening. Welcome you all to the Democracy Dialogue series. This is Subhash Gatade. I'm associated with the New Socialist Initiative. Today we have a special program in the series to discuss the elections. And we have a special panel with us, Professor Zoya Hasan and Professor Ajay Gudavarthy. I thank them on behalf of NSI for accepting our invite. Professor Zoya Hasan is Professor Emerita JNU, and she has been a distinguished faculty at Council for Social Development. She has been former member of NCM, National Council for Minorities, and she has edited many books. The last one is, I think, Ideology and Organization in Indian Politics, Growing Polarization and Declining Congress Party, Forging Identities, Gender, Communities and State in India, Agitation to Legislation, Negotiating Equity and Justice, Politics and Inclusion, Politics of Inclusion. She will be talking on India's 2024 elections, implications for democracy. Our second panelist is Professor Ajay Gudavarthy. He is at present at Center for Political Studies, JNU. He was visiting professor at Göttingen University, Germany, and he was visiting fellow at University of Aberdeen, Scotland, and also he was at SOAS, London. He has written many books and is a regular columnist in many magazines. Some of his recent publications are Politics, Ethics and Emotions in New India, India After Modi, Populism and the Right, Revolutionary Violence versus Democracy, Narratives from India, and Politics of Post-Civil Society. And one of the edited books of his was much discussed. Its title is Secular Sectarianism. He'll be talking on India in search of populist constitutionalism. Welcome, Professor Zoya Hasan and Professor Ajay Gudavarthy for this discussion. And I invite Professor Zoya Hasan to share her views. Zoya Hasan.
Thank you. Many thanks to the Democracy Dialogue series for organizing this panel on the 2024 elections. And special thanks to Subhash Gatade and Ravi Sinha for inviting me to speak in this panel. Mr. Gatade has already given the title of my talk today, which I hope to be brief so that we can have a Q&A and discussions. Now, the Bhartiya Janata Party fell short of an absolute majority, which is a far cry from its claims made during the election campaign. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his party had hoped for a landslide victory in the elections, but they won just 240 seats, well under the halfway mark of 272, and have needed coalition partners to form the government. The Congress-led India bloc won 234 seats and posted 41.4% vote share against the 43.9% posted by the NDA coalition. The BJP is down nearly 1 percentage point in its vote share from 2019. Now, of course, the BJP hasn't lost the election, but it has been humbled. And BJP's humbling at the ballot box is a victory for Indian democracy. I will highlight a few important takeaways from this remarkable election centered on three questions. What do these elections, 2024 elections, signify? Why did Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the BJP fail to improve their support, or rather, why is there a decline in their support? What does it mean for the opposition and, above all, for India's democracy? Now, before I start, I think it's important to set the context. Election 2024 was fought against the backdrop of growing Hindu nationalism and deepening authoritarianism, and the ruling party's stranglehold over money, media, and capture or subversion of nearly every significant institution in India. The BJP is one of the richest political parties in the world, and it has more money than all other parties put together. It created a fundraising mechanism which was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court earlier this year, that is the electoral bond scheme, to take advantage of anonymous political donations. And that the Supreme Court declaring it unconstitutional, I think, in a way, said the preamble to this election. Importantly, the assets of the Congress party were frozen by the Income Tax Department on the charge of non-payment of dues. The chief ministers of Delhi and Jharkhand were arrested on money laundering charges, and they were jailed. Both of them are still in jail. The government routinely targeted opponents and used its power and money to split opposition parties and engineer defections. It turned the mainstream media into propaganda arms of the government, while the administrative machinery of the state was doing its best to cripple the opposition in what was among the most unfair and one-sided elections the country had ever seen. Now, this election was centered on Narendra Modi. The entire party structure and government was built around advertising him. Even the BJP manifesto was called Modi Ki Guarantee. But Modi failed to improve his standing or the support for his party. The vote was a rebuke to both authoritarian governance and the Prime Minister's self-proclaimed invincibility. And for the first time, the party did not do well in constituencies where Narendra Modi spent time campaigning. Three results stand out, and I would argue they sort of sum up the election in many ways. Modi won in his own Varanasi constituency by a narrow margin of 1.5 lakh votes when the BJP was boasting of a victory by a record margin. Faizabad, Ayodhya, where the Ram temple opening in January was billed as the ultimate triumph of Hindutva, rejected, and I underline this, rejected the BJP in favor of a Samajwadi leader from the Dalit community. Third, the BJP lost in Banswara in Rajasthan, where the Prime Minister for the first time demonized Muslims by calling them infiltrators. So the verdict then signals the rejection of one leader, one ideology, and one party state, divisive politics, and a model of development that promoted crony capitalists without improving the lives of common people. Modi has not been voted out, but the ground beneath his feet has profoundly shifted. He has entered his third term in office, but with his authority badly dented. So the 2024 verdict, I would argue, shows the limits of communal polarization as a mobilization strategy, pitting Hindus and Muslims against each other, which was the mainstay of the BJP campaign. The BJP's narrow win, well, if we can call it a win, they did not get an absolute majority. They actually lost 63 seats from their 219 tally of 303 seats. So their narrow win suggests that voters saw through the communal rhetoric and the divisive campaign. The verdict, one might argue, is a partial repudiation of the Islamophobic campaign, if not a rejection of it. The CSDS Lokniti post-poll survey published in the Hindu newspaper confirms this. It showed an exhaustion with Hindutva politics, especially among the marginalized sections in the Hindi heartland. I think, secondly, the verdict points to the importance of economic issues. The significant drop in BJP seats is linked to the crisis of employment, inadequate livelihoods from self-employment, rising prices, and the controversial Agnipath army recruitment scheme program, among other things. Economic issues mattered because economic benefits of growth and their distribution has been so uneven in India for a long time, but more so in the past 10 years. The fruits of growth are clearly landing in the lap of India's rich, drawn exclusively from the country's upper castes who back the BJP fully. As we know, and it's been widely commented upon, the income share of India's top 1% is the highest, at least since the 1920s, and is among the highest in the world. Now, I think the opposition bloc put the prime minister on the defensive by constantly painting him as a friend of industrialist Gautam Adani and Mukesh Ambani, the two richest men whose combined wealth is more than double what the country spends on defense every year. On the other hand, the much touted new welfareism of this government, the benefits of this much hyped new welfareism was unfounded. According to data, central public spending on education and health hardly increased during the past 10 years. Expenditure on social services as a share of total government expenditure did not increase. In fact, it was the same as during Congress years. But the BJP government succeeded in branding it as something brand new, something that other governments had not done, and it has been called by many as new welfareism. But the fact is that successive governments at the center and states have provided welfare through various measures. Now, this government advertised it as entirely new, and what is more, it advertised it as the benevolence or the gifts from the prime minister to the poor with his photograph on bags of rice and the free ration food was that has been distributed since COVID-19. Livelihood issues, particularly unemployment, price rise, loomed large in the voters' mind in this election. But these issues were pushed to the background by redirecting the anger of the poor and the marginalized Hindu communities away from the privileged, from the crony capitalists, towards Muslims. As the campaign progressed, the prime minister became more divisive in his electoral rhetoric. But this pro-Hindu rhetoric did not work in broadening support for him or his party. Actually, it might have been counterproductive. Local and other factors and state-specific factors played a more important role in this election. The big surprise came from Uttar Pradesh, my state, and Ayodhya. I'm from very close to Ayodhya, Barabanki, Faizabad. So I'm particularly delighted by BJP's defeat in Ayodhya, Faizabad. So the big surprise came from Uttar Pradesh, where the BJP and its allies got fewer seats than the India bloc, which many had written off almost until the day before the election results were announced. No other state exemplifies the BJP's disappointing performance more starkly than Uttar Pradesh, where the party can no longer rely on Hindutva as a cementing force, as it still can in the states such as Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Chhattisgarh. The Samajwadi's Mandal politics, what some have called Mandal 3, to distinguish it from the earlier phases of Mandal politics, overpowered Hindu nationalism in this election. The BJP possibly did not take into account how its policies were playing out among the poorer segments of the state's population, and we know there are plenty of poor in that state, mainly lower OBCs and Dalits, who voted against the party despite the construction of the Ram temple. BJP assumed that the election was a done deal in Uttar Pradesh after the inauguration of the Ram temple there. But many voters, in the course of the campaign, told reporters, expressed concern about their livelihood issues and that their earnings haven't gone up, even as prices haven't come down because of the temple. Now, the Samajwadi Congress combined has won 43 seats. Please note, 43 seats to the BJP's 33, which is almost half of what the BJP had won in 2019. And its vote share, that is BJP's vote share in UP, has declined by 8 percentage points. This is clearly a big setback for the BJP because Hindi heartland propelled the BJP to victory in 2014 and 2019, but the voters appeared to be pulling back their support despite the construction of the Ram temple. Now, the defeat in Faizabad and the surrounding constituencies, 10 of them in Awadh, the epicenter of the Ayodhya movement, was clearly part of a broader discontent among millions of people left behind in one of the world's fastest growing economies. People clearly ask, and quite rightly ask, what have we gained from India's rapid growth? This is where the promises made by the India bloc played a significant role in enhancing their support. And I think the success of the Samajwadi Party, which must be noted, was achieved by its new strategy and by its candidate choices and by including non-Yadav OBCs and Dalits in the new Mandal 3 social coalition that it forged. The Congress too, Congress's fortunes were also boosted, very importantly, by the return of Dalits on the back of its agenda of social justice and the protection of the Constitution. Now, social justice was the centerpiece of the Congress manifesto, which the BJP systematically defamed to discredit policies of equity and distribution. I would argue that the Congress manifesto was one of the highlights of this election. From the moment the Congress released its manifesto, the Prime Minister attacked it in almost every speech. Meanwhile, the BJP manifesto was forgotten by the Prime Minister, even though it was called Modi Ki Guarantee, and it was forgotten by the BJP itself. The ruling party's campaign linked the Congress manifesto entirely to Muslims, though the word Muslim did not figure in it. BJP leaders accused the Congress of planning to snatch away the benefits of OBCs, scheduled castes, and scheduled tribes, and giving it all to Muslims with a Mangal Sutra as bonus. It is clear the narrative of social and economic justice and their demand for a caste census, or rather a promise for a caste census, provoked the BJP's top leadership to communalize the Congress's Nyay promises. The Prime Minister tried to stoke irrational anxieties in Hindu voters, claiming he was the only leader capable of stopping the opposition, especially the Congress, from seizing the property and assets of Hindus and handing them over to Muslims. But I think it is noteworthy that Muslims were not provoked. They did not react to this absolutely bigoted campaign, but they responded enthusiastically at the ballot box by voting strongly for their self-respect and therefore for the opposition. Now, fourthly, the BJP overplayed its hands in squeezing the opposition. This encouraged the opposition parties to come together and in projecting one common candidate as the face of their alliance in very many states, not in all states, but in many, many states, which meant that the anti-BJP vote did not splinter. So I would say that opposition unity played a very important part in this election, and indeed in many other countries, when the opposition has united against the right, it has helped the opposition, and the same happened here. So the opposition parties then managed to forge unity, as I said, in major states, which is an important reason why the BJP lost so many seats. The results have been a shot in the arm for the Congress. The party's tally increased from 52 to 99. The Congress's share of national votes has increased by 1.7 percentage points, which is not spectacular. It is not huge, but it is an important increase because the Congress contested 93 fewer seats this time. The media will not tell you this when they say that that Congress's vote share hasn't really increased significantly. It has increased significantly if we take into account that they contested fewer seats. Rahul Gandhi and the party president, Mallikarjun Kharge, took the fight against the BJP to the people energetically. They struck the right chords with their emphasis on securing the constitution. However, the Congress has not done as well as expected. Congress won 79 of its 99 seats from only 9 states, and it has won very few seats from the other nine states. In short, in 9 other states that have 170 seats, the Congress won only 4, and there are several states where it actually did not open its account. So I think it will be useful to analyze what the Congress did right in the former 9 states and what it did wrong in the latter 9 states where it won only 4 seats. Now, going by the seats won in the 2024 elections, Congress has made a head start in 3 states, which is to say Maharashtra, Haryana, and to some extent, and to some extent in Karnataka as well. And 2 of these states will be going to the polls by the end of this year. But overall, I think the results show that people-oriented politics is the path for it to pursue. Rahul Gandhi emerged from this election as a formidable leader with credibility and legitimacy consolidated through this election. He presented a clear ideological and political stand that positioned him as a humane people's leader focusing on democracy and social justice. The 2 Bharat Jodo Yatras made him a popular leader. But it is not only the yatras, but also the way, and I emphasize this, the way he helped to build a coalition of parties with the Congress taking a back seat in many states and agreeing to contest fewer seats as asked by its allies. And secondly, the importance of two-way communication with the masses and responding by formulating policies and programs based on what people want was the lesson that Rahul Gandhi learned from his 2 Bharat Jodo Yatras. But of course, and I again want to underline this, it remains to be seen whether the left of center position that he has taken will be persevered, and most importantly, will it be embraced by senior party leaders in the long run. Most importantly, the opposition alliance declared this election to be a battle for saving the constitution and saving democracy. I think this is what made this election a really beautiful election. The need for social and economic justice was neatly tied to fears about the survival of the constitution. The opposition was quick on its feet and landed an early punch on this. The proximate trigger was, of course, the statement of some leaders that 400 seats would empower the BJP to change the constitution. And interestingly, the senior leaders did not really deny this, so to speak. The slogan "Ab ki baar, 400 par" backfired, with voters asking why the BJP needed 400 seats when 272 seats is enough to form a government. The call for such a massive majority was projected by the opposition quite smartly as a threat to change the constitution and take away what's non-negotiable for many sections of voters. These fears were dismissed as absurd, but the fact of the matter is that it resonated with voters, especially Dalits, who wanted to protect the constitution, which is the basis of their rights and reservations. And I think it even appealed to sections of middle classes who were unhappy with threats to the right to dissent and protest. So this election, to a large extent, turned on anxieties about the sanctity of the constitutions. Finally, these elections will be remembered, one, for the stagnating popularity of the Prime Minister, his invincibility stands shattered, the rejuvenation of the Congress, and the resilience of India's democracy. It underlines a yearning for the defense of constitutional values and the significance of people's issues as against identity politics. The electorate has tried to limit the concentration of power and reopen the country's political space by restoring a measure of balance, a semblance of balance, I should say, between different political parties. The revived competition will encourage, or so we hope, both institutions and civil society to act independently. The opposition parties have been given a new lease of life. This is the biggest takeaway from this election. They could act as a defender of democratic rights in parliament and outside, in coordination with civil society groups who have supported the opposition campaigns on the ground in very difficult circumstances. Opposition parties, I would say, could lead by example in the states that they are in power. They can introduce changes in economic policy framework to ensure basic social and economic rights for everyone and respect dissent. Overall, the opposition must provide a clear and sustained alternative to the NDA in terms of governance and alternative policies that offer a strong contrast to the undemocratic, centralizing, anti-federal, unitary rule of the BJP. Again, finally, and this is finally for sure, Indian voters have shown that when they see threats to democracy, they tend to place limits on leaders with autocratic tendencies. The BJP's reduced majority raises the possibility of imposing checks and balances on the government and a recognition of the need to slow down the rapid rise in inequality. India is right now perhaps the most unequal country in the world. And also, we can hope that there will be a slowdown in the overuse of the politics of religion, which means the government will have to tread a more inclusive path going forward. But whether Prime Minister Narendra Modi is capable of doing this remains to be seen. If we go by his track record from the time he was Chief Minister of Gujarat, and the 10 years as Prime Minister, there's very little to suggest that consensus and accommodation are part of his style of functioning. The notable exclusion of Muslims from the new cabinet is a strong indication that BJP's core agenda will not change under the compulsions of coalition politics. The Hindu nationalist platform demands the political and cultural marginalization and exclusion of India's 200 million Muslims. But there is bound to be tension between placating the party's core support base and accommodating the concerns of the wider electorate, which seem to have to be turned off by the BJP's vitriolic campaign. It was one of the most vitriolic and vulgar campaigns that the BJP has mounted ever. This is the second part, which is the wider concerns of the electorate, which is turned off by the BJP's vitriolic campaigns. I think this is a vindication of India's democracy and the importance of plurality in Indian politics. That may be the most important consequence of the 2024 general elections. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zoya ji, for bringing out the many facets of this 2024 elections and what we have gained, all the different factors, and especially the different factors like you're talking about Mandal 3 and Congress 2. So many things are there. So before we have discussion on this, I will invite our Professor Ajay Gudavarthy to share his views, and then we will have enough discussion around it. Ajay, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think, am I audible?
Yeah, audible.
Great. So let me also begin by thanking New Socialist Initiative and Subhash for this wonderful opportunity. I think Zoya has already covered a lot of ground in explaining the dynamics of the election. So let me then therefore allow me to focus on the important conceptual questions that emerge for especially the progressive left socialist groups in understanding Indian politics, the dynamics that have changed over the last 10 years. What are the questions that we need to really focus upon? I think the first, I would point 4 or 5 such conceptual questions for your consideration. One, I see this election as a contest between cultural populism, authoritarian cultural populism of the right led by the BJP, and a certain kind of a liberal constitutionalism led by the Congress and the opposition parties. And my own reading, going by the vote share, going by the number of seats, going by the nature of campaign, is that electorate has refused to make a choice between these two. That is between cultural populism and constitutionalism. In fact, what the electorate seems to be pushing towards is what in my recent writing on the Outlook I've referred to it as to reinvent Indian democracy in terms of what I call as a unicorn democracy. That is to certain combination of cultural populism with liberal constitutionalism that talks about social and economic justice. I think Indian politics for way too long has had this kind of an endemic divide between culturalism and constitutionalism. I think one of the default limitation of constitutional language, question of economic and social justice has been that it has displaced the question of culture. I think I'm talking of culture not merely as religion, but culture in a broader sense of that includes one's ethnic, linguistic, religious, caste-based identities, all of which, along with the notion of nation and civilization, all of which lend, I think, a great sense of belonging. I think one of the greatest strengths of right-wing politics led by Mr. Modi has been that they have succeeded in offering, of course, not the Muslims, but the majority community a deep sense of belonging, cultural belonging. I think, and that, to my mind, continues to resonate on the ground. And the opposition did well to demonstrate in these elections the electoral viability of constitutional language. I think for long we thought that constitution would have no purchase, but here I would add a caveat and argue that as long as the opposition were putting forth constitution as an abstract idea, save democracy, save constitution, I don't think it had much resonance on the ground. But once constitutional language was linked directly to question of reservations, direct benefits to SC, ST and vulnerable communities, we could see that there was a great resonance. So I think the first question that really emerges from this election is that we need to think in terms of culture. I think culture gets foregrounded, cultural language, local cultural idiom gets foregrounded. It's a symptom of certain kind of social democratization. And we need to positively value that culture and cultural language, rather than pose a counter between question of culture and justice, or between question of culture and constitutionalism. Because as I see, we need to make a distinction that all demand for a deep sense of cultural belonging is not necessarily communal or Islamophobic. I think that we need to make a conceptual wedge between what the majority community was looking for was a deep sense of cultural belonging. What the BJP and RSS were attempting to do with that sense of cultural belonging was to give it a communal spin. So cultural belonging could be about question of dignity, it could be about question of recognition, it could be about question of memory, but all of that BJP and RSS tried to veer towards a kind of a communal polarization, and we saw the limits of that. I think the divided mandate that I think really pushes us to make a very nuanced distinction that people still approve of BJP's cultural belonging idea, politics, but they do not really resonate or support when they veer it towards cultural majoritarianism, complete exclusion of religious minorities, vitriolic language, communal polarization. And therefore, this is an outstanding question we will be taking into the next term, that how do we know, how does the opposition reinvent and what kind of a claim they can make to this kind of cultural belonging, one, and two, how are they going to link it with constitutional language of social and economic justice without undermining and sidelining this question of culture. Culture, as I said, I'm talking in a broader sense. That's my first point. The second important, I think, a very interesting dynamic that emerged in this election is in terms of the nature of manufacturing the majority Hindu identity. I think Hindu identity in general now seems to have a much larger purchase than what we thought. The most political scientists of previous era thought that India being divided in terms of caste, there is no way that India can move towards a confessional majority, which is what has played out in this election. But within that, I think there is a certain space that has emerged for Hindu identity as a cultural identity. Therefore, we need to now further think in terms of what would be the nature of politicization of this idea of the Hindu identity, the public Hindu identity, or the political Hindu identity. Here, I think there's a very interesting dynamic that has emerged between how the Mandir issue, once it was built, did not resonate with the electorate. But abrogation of Article 370 continues to have fair degree of purchase, and that we can see even in this 2024. The moment Modi is back in power, media, if you look at the media coverage, it is back to playing Kashmir, whether it is the question of UAP against Arundhati Roy, whether it is a question of debate on terrorism in Kashmir. I think Kashmir will be a central issue that the center of this 2024 regime. Now, the question that we need to really raise is that if there is a purchase to public political mobilization of the Hindu identity, what is the sense that we are getting between this identity, which seems to be torn between rejection of politicization of temple on one hand, but seems to have a resonation towards resonate in terms of the abrogation of Article 370. So do we refer to this that there is a certain purchase of cultural nationalism, but not cultural majoritarianism? At least to begin with, that is the initial formulation I would make, that People have rejected building temple. I think even temple had kind of catapulted BJP because of the narrative of historical injury that Hindus had due to 400 years of Muslim rule and temple and all of that, which we have a fairly familiar story which we have had. So it's more of a question of historical injury that kind of resonate why the temple issue kind of had some purchase on the ground. But once the temple has been built, the crass nature of politicization of the temple, the idea of temple being linked to question of development, there's certain kind of a marketization of spirituality that happened around temple. If you see the advertisements of the temple, they were, the backdrop was flyovers and buildings. Temple was seen as a site for bringing new investments to Uttar Pradesh. There were statistics being thrown around in terms of how 25,000 crore business has increased. Government is investing on new resources to the tune of 84,000 crores on building up Ayodhya as the new global tourist site, so on and so forth. But all of this, and it's extremely interesting to see that all of this has been kind of rejected by the electorate. Of course, people say that there are also local reasons, the way Ayodhya voted, the way land was managed, so on and so forth. But by and large, a pan-Indian sentiment was that BJP did not have a walkover because they built the temple. I think that's a very, very significant part of this. But as I said, Article 370 and Kashmir will continue to remain. And what does this tell about the nature of public Hindu identity? As I said, can we make a distinction between cultural nationalism and cultural majoritarianism? That people are rejecting a certain kind of a muscular majoritarian mobilization, but certain national sentiment can continue to resist. What does this mean in practically on the ground? How would it convert if we make this kind of a distinction? Is an open question. It's a fairly complex question, which I will not get into currently. Third important takeaway and question is the debate that emerged in course of this election is the north-south divide. I think that's a very significant question, not just because of a divide between southern and northern parts. The fact that BJP still continues to remain very, very weak in the southern part, though they did beyond expectations in Karnataka, they partly expanded in Telangana, but by and large, South continues to reject BJP. And I think this is a big, there's a big question there as to why is that the BJP resonates much stronger in the Hindi heartland and continues to remain in spite of a popular leader. Modi continues to have significant popularity even south of India's. But when it comes to electoral outcomes, BJP continues to falter. I think one reason has been that in both assembly elections in Karnataka and Telangana and in parliamentary elections, social activists, independent social activist groups of working on health, on issues of education, issues of malnutrition, 100 such social organizations in Karnataka took up what they refer to as Eddelu Karnataka campaign, that is Wake Up Karnataka campaign. They took up Jago Telangana campaign in Telangana. This is the first time, I think, and this is a very significant departure from the past, that this elections, both assembly and parliamentary elections, reflected that social activism can have an electoral impact. All through in the past, I think the social activism and political dynamics were too divided in the Indian context. We do remember the election of Ms. Medha Patkar losing election badly in Bombay. We remember Sharmila, Irom Sharmila, getting only 200 votes in assembly elections in Manipur. We know question of Prakash Raj in Bangalore. So I can name any number of social activists who lost very badly once they enter into the electoral domain. And electoral dynamics and social mobilization dynamics in the Indian context have always remained divergent. But South, for the first time, I think has demonstrated this possibility of social activism having electoral purchase. I think this is a long-term trend to stay. Will Northern Belt come under this impact? Why is it that the North does not have similar kind of social activism? One of the reasons why BJP has become such an indomitable force. Look at the way they have come back in Madhya Pradesh. Simply shocking. For the third time, they have swept Madhya Pradesh. They did fairly well in Uttar Pradesh. They did well in Bihar. They did well in Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan. There's no question about it that BJP's return has to do much with the northern belt. And I would directly link that to the absence of social activism, independent of social development agenda, independent social dialogue. I think if you take the example of Telangana, I did a piece sometime back talking about Telangana model of development, where I argued that the difference is that states like Telangana and Karnataka continue to have social mobilization around questions of religion, caste, economic inequality, malnutrition, education, and health, independent of political parties. I think the big lacuna we have in the northern states is we do not have any such major independent movements. If you look at Telangana, we have had a strong independent Dalit movement. We have had left politics, which was had a strong hold in terms of popular imagination, and North somewhere I think has not had this kind of. So and an important takeaway from this election is that social activists have demonstrated that they've campaigned. You know, in Telangana and Karnataka, both social activists campaigned for 6 months prior to both parliamentary elections and assembly elections, and we could see that the fair amount of influence this kind of activism has on electoral behavior of the voters. So my third question would be that can we, and this is an immediate question, pressing question, that can we reduce this gap between the south and the north? Can we kind of export this southern model to the northern states? I think the immediate question would be that why is it North has not had independent social struggles of Dalits, of religious minorities, or on questions of education and health? I think this is a pressing question we need to take up, independent of electoral calculations of what BJP does, because southern states like Kerala, Telangana continue to have a fair degree of presence of the RSS. But it's the other way around, that RSS fails to convert its social presence into electoral benefits for the BJP. So in South, people are able to make that distinction and they do not immediately collapse the two. I think in the North, that separation is not happening and that collapse is happening too fast. So this will be third big question we will take into the third term, is that how do we bring back this social dialogue in northern states independent of electoral politics? For instance, a caste question in UP, immediately it converts into a political party like BSP, and there's a hyper politicization or electoralism of the caste question. If you come to South, BSP struggles, though there is a strong independent Dalit movement. BSP simply struggles to get the support of the Dalits, because Dalits see anti-caste question in terms of social development and not only in terms of identity. And I think this is a big difference I see between the North and the South. As long as there is limitation, or this is mediated, the anti-caste politics, not just in terms of identity and representation, but to the idea of socio-economic inequalities, access to education, access to health, questions of that. I think in North, entire debate has been collapsed into a political question of representation, and there is no space for independent dialogue in linking caste to questions of education and health. So that's my third big question that we should keep our eye on. Then that's a pressing political challenge that progressive sections in India have in terms of how to transform the nature of social and political mobilization in the North. My fourth question would be on the question of representation. That I think if you observe closely, BJP has almost been transformative when it comes to the question of representation. What Congress could not achieve in 50 years, and Congress continues to remain a caste Hindu heavy leadership at the top, and most of its leadership has not percolated down to the lower echelons of society. And BJP has been, I think, almost, one is tempted to say, transformative when it comes to the question of representation. Look at the way they have given representation to EBCs, SCs, STs, OBCs, barring Muslims. That's also the advantage, or quote unquote advantage, BJP has, that if you do not offer seats to Muslims, then you have plentier options. And therefore, what they have done is what I call internal subversion of democracy. And this is a long-standing question which opposition parties and progressives in this country need to address. That here is a socially conservative political party backed by a conservative social force like the RSS, but why is it that on the question of representation, BJP and RSS seem to have very progressive dynamics, that they're easily able to make an ST a chief minister, they're easily able to make an SC a chief minister, they're easily able to make an ST a president. One might still call it tokenism, but in a skewed society with steep social hierarchies, steep social discrimination, continued practice of untouchability, representation matters. Representation is a dimension of justice. So what the BJP and RSS are doing is really to kind of make this pitch for more egalitarian representation, which is a very progressive thing. One of the reasons why SC and Dalit and OBC votes shifted so majorly to BJP. 2019 data of the CSDS shows 42% of OBCs and 33% of Dalits moved to the BJP. Of course, that has come down in this election. If you look at the statistics in terms of reserved constituencies, BJP won 77 reserved constituencies last time and 55 reserved constituencies this time, again, because of this anxiety around constitution and reservation. But that still leaves out this question that BJP and RSS have thrown a challenge at progressive left oppositional parties, that if they are able to redistribute representation, recirculate and offer greater representation to marginalized social groups, how do we characterize that representation? I think we know that given the RSS ideology, this may not signify a major departure in terms of bringing in certain social equality. But even then, this in itself, what RSS is doing is to offer representation from within and subvert democratic process from within. That is, they are co-opting, increasing. In Telangana, if you look at their spread, it happened in Adilabad district. This time they won extra seats in Adilabad district. And the story is that they triggered or mobilized intra-Dalit conflicts. That Lambada is the dominant tribal group, which has kind of taken off majority of benefits of reservation in the last 20 or 30 years. And what RSS and BJP have done is that mobilized rest of the tribal subgroups against this dominant Lambada group, and they all consolidated behind BJP. And that's how BJP made major inroads and won MP seats even in Adilabad district. Now, if you take this one case study, I think BJP has done this consistently in state after state. In Uttar Pradesh, they mobilized against Yadavs, and also Rajputs. In Haryana, they mobilized against Jats. So wherever they go, their standard strategy today is to isolate the dominant caste and mobilize the rest of marginalized castes, seem to immediately kind of consolidate behind BJP. So this is a very great experiment of subverting democracy internally. No, you can't plausibly grudge BJP and RSS for giving greater representation to Dalits and STs. That is something that we cannot obviously do in a democracy. So, but what they are doing is that using that greater representation to kind of enforce hierarchies from above. And that's again a very complex question. I don't have the time to get into the details of it. But this will be, to my mind, the fourth major political challenge that opposition has. Unless we kind of decode this, and unless we mobilize an alternative discourse against this, there is no reason why subaltern social classes and castes need to move back to the opposition parties. If BJP is offering them greater and greater representation, then obviously I think this shift of OBCs and Dalits towards the BJP is here to stay, with or without the Muslim question. So I think on certain occasions, I would also argue the anti-Muslim agenda of the BJP is a red herring. That they are recalibrating a lot of things on the ground, social reconfiguration, while we are caught in this Hindu-Muslim or secular communal binary. I don't think that binary can fully capture the experiments of BJP RSS on the ground. We will have to think of why does the BJP and RSS not think of greater representation to the subaltern caste as a threat to their agenda of Hindutva? Why do they think that that is not a challenge to their idea of Hindu Rashtra or to their idea of building a Brahminical Hindu state? This is a very big question, that why do they think that these groups are so easily vulnerable and can be so easily accommodated within the larger agenda of Hindu Rashtra? Does this mean that even Hindu Rashtra would be a different order, that it's not going to be the traditional Manusmriti kind of Brahminical Hindu order that we always think that it is? Does it mean that they're going to mobilize bottom up differently and impose a Hindu identity, which essentially means a caste Hindu identity from above? I don't know. I mean, one has to keep a watch. One cannot rule out the fact that RSS, being a pragmatic organization, can make certain pragmatic adjustments to its ideology. But this is, I think, a very major challenge that oppositional forces will continue to have. That a question that RSS has thrown to us is that they do not think, unlike opposition, which is very interesting, that opposition parties, regional parties like SP or Congress, struggle to bring this change in social alignment. They struggle to bring new social caste, give them leadership. I mean, there's immediately revolt. You know, Telangana, I know the case very closely, that if you move the leadership away from Reddy community, there is a major upheaval from bottom up against, major upheaval by the dominant groups. And therefore, it's a thing that you cannot easily do. But when BJP walks in, they give immediately leadership not to the dominant Reddy or Kamma community. They began with giving leadership to the OBC communities. They, in fact, last assembly election, their major campaign was, we will make the first OBC chief minister in Telangana, which is a very great symbolic move. So this is another big question for us, that why is it that BJP is able to make this transformation so easily, that they have such a hold? Is it an organizational hold? Is it organizational discipline? Or is it simply that the Hindu identity allows you for the caste dynamics to play very differently when you do not have an access to that Hindu identity? That is it that the dominant groups feel less threatened when you make this shift to OBC and Dalit leadership within the Hindu fold? These are very temporary and very preliminary questions, hypothesis I'm putting on table. But this is a question that is for a long term, that SP continues to struggle to shift its leadership away from Yadavs. Now Congress struggles to shift its leadership away from caste Hindu leadership. It's a BJP with RSS kind of a social conservative force behind it, that it looks so transformative, that every new chief minister they have included, especially in the last 5 years, belong invariable to the OBC and Dalit. In a survey that I did 10 years back on ABVP organization, it is 100% SCs and STs who are in office bearer capacity in ABVP across Telangana. 100%. I've got the statistics in all office bearers of president and general secretary in all universities in Telangana is either an OBC or a Dalit, either a Madigo or a Mala. So this is, I think, a question that we need to pick up with some sense of urgency, that why is it that BJP can make this shift without jeopardizing an organizational conflict, but the opposition and even left parties struggle to make this shift, and there is so much of upheaval that happens when BJP, non-BJP parties try to make a similar move. My fifth question would be in terms of the question that this election had a tamer voter turnout. I think this also is an important question for us to raise in long term, that why did voters not respond in an equal enthusiastic manner, that that the mobilizational energy of BJP under Mr. Modi was like a referendum style mobilization in the last 10 years. But when it came to this election, there was a sudden dip, and we do not still have the exact statistics. The dip is anywhere between 2 to 3%, 3%. So this, which is a very major dip in a first past post system. There is something for us there to explain in terms of why this election had people returning in far lesser number, while all the previous records show that India voter turnout in state after state has been increasing, and it is in assembly elections, it has crossed even 70%. But when it comes to central elections, this voter turnout this time has been rather bland, and rather it was a dull affair. Is it because India continues to remain provincial? Is it because populist authoritarian mobilization also simultaneously demobilizes people? I think this is one big question that I have, which we need to study, that even as it pushes people into some kind of a referendum style, that there is actually an underhand demobilization that happens. That why did people withdraw? Is it because of the nature of vitriolic campaign that Mr. Modi carried out, that people could not identify with that? Is it that people were disappointed with Modi but not convinced with the opposition, so they did not want to vote either ways, and therefore they thought best to sit back at home? I think upper caste in this country also faced, the statistics are not out, that vote drop has happened mostly in constituencies where BJP won. This is also an interesting statistics that one need to keep one's finger on, in terms of why is it that the traditional BJP voter did not turn out. I mean, there are many rumors around that RSS withdrew, RSS was shy, it did not campaign and mobilize its cadre to the extent that it usually did in 14 and 2019. Those are all hypotheses one can pick up as we go along. But I think one of the major questions we will have to take up is that populist authoritarian mobilization always has a tendency to push people into some kind of a withdrawal. Am I audible, Subhash?
You're audible.
Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Please go ahead. You unmute yourself. Unmute yourself. Please.
I am back anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my fifth question, and my last conclusion would be that the 10-year period under Mr. Modi and the elections cannot be analyzed as regular elections. Even as we look at the social and economic dynamics, I think there is a lot that is happening behind the scenes when it comes to electoral strategization that happens under Mr. Amit Shah's watch. There are quite a few inexplicable X factors which we need to factor in to also see, including sudden silence by the BSP. There is sudden withdrawal by BRS party. Even just before I came for this talk, I was on a 2-hour discussion with the former finance minister from BRS. He just dropped by to have a discussion to discuss the reasons for decline of BRS. I said this point, that why is it that BRS has gone in sudden decline? So there are a lot of X factors we need to keep in mind, that these are not regular patterns. The sense I get is that what BJP is doing is that they are polarizing the situation and trying to benefit even from the opposition. For instance, why is it that Mr. Owaisi responds in the tone and the tenor that the BJP wants? So BJP polarizes Hindu Muslims, puts Muslims under duress and extreme stress, and throws Mr. Owaisi as a bait. And therefore, they want that vote division to happen. But obviously, Muslims did not fall for that bait in Telangana or elsewhere. It partly happened in Uttar Pradesh. Mostly Muslims have voted for the Congress. But the overall strategy of the BJP is that they also wish to benefit by fragmenting the opposition after polarizing the situation. And therefore, every identity demand that people have on the ground, BJP tries to weaponize that by fragmenting the social base of the opposition. So we need to take into account these behind the scene machinations that happen. There is no simple way of analyzing the situation in terms of secular and communal. Because if you look at somebody like Mr. Owaisi's mobilization, it squarely fits into just what the BJP wants. And it's very clear the people they have targeted are not the people who have been opposing. Mr. Owaisi vocally opposes BJP the most, but there was no action against him. But somebody else does it, there is against Mr. Kejriwal. So I think if you see the contrast of their approach towards Mr. Owaisi and Kejriwal, it should give us at least some hint as to why BJP makes these subtle distinctions. And my own argument is that they not only consolidate their own vote base, but they also try to fragment the vote base of the opposition. And this is somewhat a new strategy that BJP seems to have generated in state after state. So my conclusion would be that going into 2024, is that what we need to really look for are these 5 and 6 conceptual questions. And what this regime is going to look like is that they will continue to pursue a majoritarian politics without a majority. And this is a new dynamics that's going to be. So last 10 years of Mr. Modi's rule, the majoritarian politics converged with a majority support that he had in terms of seats in the parliament. But this is for the first time that he will continue to pursue a majoritarian agenda without a majority. What difference will that make? This kind of a new vulnerability that the electorate has, a new kind of a challenge that it has thrown. My mind, this I have some tentative, but I'll not share as of now. But this is a question that we need to really keep our finger on. That this kind of a majoritarianism is going to be different because it lacks that majority push. We already saw that partly in the RSS comments that they made in terms of reprimanding BJP for its arrogance and things of that kind. So these are the new dynamics we will continue to witness in this new regime, and we will have to keep a close watch that the majoritarianism without majority sometimes can be more ominous than majoritarianism with majority support. With that, I thank all of you and stop here.
Thank you, Ajay, for raising interesting points about the whole election result. Really, there are many things to be discussed. The cultural nationalism versus cultural majoritarianism, the north-south divide, and also the representation, how BJP has been transformative, and all those things, many points are there. And I know that the participants will have many questions and comments to make. But before I invite them to join, I will ask my friend and comrade Ravi Sinha to say a few words, and then we can continue. Then when we can continue, open the discussion. Ravi, please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you, Zoya ji, Professor Gudavarthy, Ajay, if I may call, for such a robust and insightful analysis. It's really a pleasure. Zoya ji, we are having for the third time in this series, and Ajay is we have invited, special thanks to him to come to our platform. It has become our practice that before we open the discussion to the audience, I get a special, kind of chance to thank our speakers and ask a question, and I ask a question and get out of the way. But today we have two speakers, so I get to ask two questions. And so I will ask the indulgence of the audience. I will stay a trifle longer first with Zoya ji. So, it is impossible to disagree with any part of what she is saying. She is so, her analysis and observations are so robust, analysis so clear-headed. So I will play devil's advocate. I agree with everything she says, and yet I know I have to do my duty to ask a question. So forgive me if it is a long question or a short comment, whichever way you see it. Before these elections, activists like us in our neighborhood discussions would often say that, look, even in the 2019 election, in which this regime rode on a wave created by Pulwama and so on, they got only 37% of the vote. So we would say that 63% of those who voted did not vote for BJP. Now, one of the things, this was argument for argument's sake. We knew that if those 63% were forced to choose between Hindutva and one clear opposition to Hindutva, no one can claim that all 63 will go against Hindutva. So there were many factors involved in that. Now, if I were to say that in three, in three layers politics has happened. One is the political forces. So good thing, the reason we are feeling happy at the results, primarily because the political forces, opposition political forces joined together, by and large. And those who did not join one way or the other got practically decimated in Orissa, in Telangana, BRS, and many others, and Mayawati. Now, that was a happy situation. The political forces came together and gave a stiff challenge to BJP, and we are happy about that. The second layer is the layer of issues. The issues, Congress, led by Rahul Gandhi, was successful in bringing issues of economic and social justice to center stage of their campaign, at least, and no one knows clearly, but to some extent, I'm sure it worked. Whatever success came to opposition, issues did play a role. But I would like to ask Zoyaji about the third layer, the layer I don't have a correct word for it, but let us say that layer of the people, or at least the people created in the last 30 years of politics, the kind of politics, after Ram Janam Bhoomi movement and so on. So at the level of people, I mean, if all political forces unite, opposition political forces unite and issues do work, and still the NDA gets 43% of the vote, still BJP loses only 0.7% of its vote, still Congress gains 1.7% of the vote, all the caveats, taken in, that Congress did not fight as many seats. The political parties have to work with a given people. They can't do anything about it. So whichever state people's mind is, they have to appeal to that. But as political scientists, that both of you are, I have the curiosity that where do a given kind of this layer, layer of people work in strategizing. Later on, I will have a question for Ajay. The culture, isn't it the case that the cultural arena or cultural sub-arena of political arena is easier for the right wing because the way people are given, and what kind of a strategy a political scientist would suggest to the oppositional forces, to the centrist, liberal, rational, whatever you call it, forces in the long run, what should they do to change the people to some extent in order to have their strategies work? So that is, I don't know whether I have asked a clear question or not, but first I would like Zoyaji, if she has to say something about this, and then I will come back for a question for Ajay.
Thank you. You've raised an important point, which is about, which in a way Ajay Gudavarthy is also was speaking about, which is that it was somewhat even Steven, so to speak, because both the BJP or NDA and the Congress-led India Alliance were not, far from each other in terms of vote share. But, I think my response to what you have said, and in a way, my response to what we have heard today, is that we must take, the point that you're making, three layers, which is political forces coming together, issues of economic and social justice coming to the center stage, and then the people are what they are, and you have to work with them, so to speak. But the point is that if you're looking at the third layer, I think we have to take into account political change in UP. We cannot now talk about this election as though the election hasn't happened. We're almost talking about the situation that existed 3 months ago or 2 months ago, or what political analysts and commentators have been, or political activists for that matter, have been saying for the past so many months. I think the election has happened, and there is a change that has been brought about. And I think the biggest signpost of that change is UP. Everyone assumed that Hindutva has a permanent constituency in UP. This is not to say that BJP is not a formidable force in the country and in North India, in the Hindi heartland, and in UP too. But the fact that Awadh, which is the epicenter, not just now, but for decades of this whole movement, every single BJP candidate has lost. How can we ignore that? It's not just Faizabad and Ayodhya, for which obviously there were a complex set of reasons that account for it, and some excellent analysis has has come forth on that. But the point is not just Faizabad. Even look at all the 10 constituencies. Even in Lucknow, Rajnath Singh, who's a very powerful candidate, he won by roughly 60,000 votes. I mean, can we ignore the fact that with everything that has been done in Varanasi for the past 10 years, the Prime Minister was actually trailing for some time and then eventually won by, and can you imagine that, I mean, Ajay Rai, who's not India's most significant candidate, won 4 lakh votes. Now, so there is a change, and I think it's important. Much as we should not hype up the election, although I am personally very pleased about it, and I think it's perfectly okay for some time to feel good about it, to celebrate it. Because if this had not happened, imagine what we would have been talking about. So the point is that I think the political change in UP is significant, is very, very significant. And in part, it does answer your question that, I mean, that the people change, their thinking changes. And I think, I mean, I'm not for a moment saying that cultural issues are not important, but I'm afraid this election has highlighted the importance of economic issues. We must recognize that livelihood was at the center of this election. Now, of course, we have a first past the post system in which, as you said, the difference is not very much. But livelihood issues were right at the center, and so that tells us something about people's thinking. And people's thinking is not something that, I mean, we can't just attribute that people are thinking only in terms of cultural issues. They are thinking in terms of cultural issues. If they were, then surely they should have voted for the BJP. Despite all the demolitions, despite all everything that happened in Ayodhya and so on, people should have voted for the BJP, but they did not. And not only that, they did not vote in any of the surrounding constituencies. So I think I think UP signals a major political change, in my view, and major change in people's thinking.
Okay, so quickly, I will have a question for Ajay again. Thank you. And I agree with all the 5 major points that you make. I will just pick one thing which you partly touched today, and also which you have dealt with at greater length in your latest book. The question of bringing culture, emotion, ethics, to giving more importance, at least, into politics. I know you are not ignoring or underplaying any of the other factors, and yet underlining that importance. There, my curiosity is that whenever, especially in societies like India, but all over the world, the political forces which deploy the cultural dimension more effectively into politics, invariably those are right-wingers. And to some extent, when we criticize that the liberal, centrist, rationalist, political forces, when we criticize them, we tend to present them as some kind of, I can say we tend to present a caricature of them, as if there is no emotional dimension to what they do. and so on. And after all, even the most rational animal is an animal, so you cannot get away from other, nobody is an epitome of epistemological being, or something like that. Everybody has a body, has an interest, lives in a community and so on. So my curiosity is that how come those people who deploy cultural dimension more effectively are invariably the rightists? The way I will ask is that, do you know, for example, you have coined a term, secular sectarianism, in another context, and if I may borrow, an analogy from that, do you know of any example, any successful example of secular communitarianism, of progressive kind, of enlightened kind? Do you know of examples where culture has been deployed by secular progressive forces effectively, so that, they can, on cultural ground, they can contest the right-wing forces? That will be, that is my worry, that how we say that we should do this, but how should we do this? We, the progressives, we, the, progressive liberals or progressive leftists, or whichever, part of a spectrum you bring in. How do we do that? How do we deploy culture effectively into politics without harming our own ideological stance or ideological position? So that will be the question I would like to know your comments on.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very, very important question. That's one question that has really engaged me in the last couple of years. So I think one, to begin with, I think there's a conceptual question of how we theorize and what are our assumptions about popular culture and culture in general, right? I think much of the problem with progressives has been that we have, I think, willingly or unknowingly equated all of culture or most of culture with conservatism, that we collapse culture, popular culture and prejudice, I think, far too quickly. So that's been one of the problems why we have really failed to carry out much needed experiments on the cultural front, which has kind of left a complete open field for RSS. RSS is the only cultural organization today, organized force on ground today, which is talking in cultural idiom. Look at the kinds of experiments they are making in terms of organizing. Once they discovered Ram has been discovered as an upper caste god, in much of North India, they began Shiv Charchas, which is like a lower caste OBC god. So I think, and therefore, my first plea would be that we need to transform our attitude and assumptions of culture. Culture is not only about prejudice. Culture is not only about being conservative. Culture is essentially about a certain lived idea of solidarity, that there are everyday ethics about deep notions of solidarity, and people completely realize in their everyday life a core sense of interdependence. Now, that's the idea of culture I think we have. And if you look at, there's plenty of evidence in Indian history, from Bhakti movement beginning with Buddha to Bhakti movement to Basava to Narayan Guru. In fact, coincidentally, left is strong both in Bengal and Kerala, where there have had been cultural experiments, whether it's Basava in Karnataka, whether it's Narayan Guru in Kerala. So I think we have to transform our idea of culture. The culture carries prejudices, no doubt. Culture perpetuates a certain degree of exclusion, but culture at the core is in terms of solidarity. So once BJP and RSS come and argue in terms of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas or Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, these are deeply attractive ideas. They emotionally resonate with people because they offer you an immediate sense of belonging. Much of the left progressive alternatives offer a constitutional language of justice, which is important in terms of offering social mobility, but they does not necessarily offer a deep sense of cultural belonging. So the question that will really engage us for a long time, and I'm happy with this result, that I think this results has really, the electorate has refused to make a choice that have been posed by the left-right division. that the left stands for constitutional justice and right for cultural belonging. I think electorate is now pushing us to think in terms of reinventing what I call a unicorn democracy, that how do we bring cultural belonging without necessarily being communal, without necessarily excluding, otherizing other communities, and link it to notions of justice. So that's a deep question that will, of course, need another invite from NSI to discuss some other point in time.
I will ask my friend Bhargav to take up some question in the chat box. Bhargav, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, both the speakers, Professor Zoya ji and Ajay, for this wonderful and insightful analysis. And there are many comments and questions in the chat box, and many comments profusely thanking both of you for giving this very impactful analysis. And I'd like to take some comments which have some questions in them. First is by Vinu Gundivela. It seems the RSS is disappointed with the performance of Modi and Shah. What will it take RSS to replace them? Is one question. Even though it is not directed to any one of you, both of them or any one of you can answer that.
I think Zoya is in a better position to answer this. As to will they be removed?
Well, I think it's clearly there is some kind of khatpat going on between the BJP and the RSS, but I'm not sure whether this is friendly fire or this is serious opposition, because both BJP and RSS are dependent on each other. They have gained, I mean, the RSS has gained hugely from state support. I mean, what is happening, I mean, the expansion of the RSS that we are talking about is very much state driven. So to think that the RSS is about to pull the rug from under the feet of the Prime Minister, who has contributed so hugely to the achievement of most of the RSS agenda, barring the Uniform Civil Code. It has already, most of their agenda has been achieved. So to think that the RSS would be unhappy with the BJP, I think is probably overstating it, although there is an opinion, and a strong opinion, that in this election, possibly the RSS cadres were not out there campaigning for the BJP, but I'm not sure. I mean, that's what, for example, Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, who surely knows much more than I do about the BJP and the RSS, he has argued over the last week or so that yes, that the RSS was not so active. But that said, I mean, that may well be true, but to think that the differences are so serious that they will actually replace the Prime Minister Modi. Although Christoph Jaffalo, another great expert on the BJP RSS, said in an interview yesterday to The Wire that the RSS might consider appointing somebody more pliable than. But I mean, you know, it's very early days yet. I mean, this Modi, the third Modi government has been in power for exactly a week. And in that 1 week, the Prime Minister has been away for 36 hours in Italy. So effectively, he has been in power for 6 days. So I think it's early to draw conclusions, but yes, and also there is some very interesting analysis about Mohan Bhagwat's comments and the comments that have been made by other RSS people. For example, there's a great deal of discussion that what the RSS is trying to do is to present itself as an opposition, so as to, in a way, blunt the opposition coming from the India bloc. Now, there is something in this argument as well. But as I said, I think it's really too early for us to draw draw any assessment, because we have to see how this coalition takes shape. And again, I think possibly Ajay would have a better understanding of how the two key partners, which is to say Telugu Desam and JDU, will act. Because so far it seems that there may be some differences on social issues, but on and they might restrain. They might privately restrain the BJP, but it looks like the focus of both these leaders is on states and on state rights, and getting more finances, more money for their states. And surely Telugu Desam is particularly focused on getting their capital going, Amravati going. That's his major project of Chandrababu Naidu, apart from wanting his son to succeed him, Nara Lokesh, as soon as possible, during the next 3-4 years. So I think, the whole situation is complex, but it doesn't look like, but as I said, I will hold my horses and wait and see. I think we have to wait and watch.
Ajay, in your panel discussion today, you had expressed very different opinion about the whole issue. No? Ajay, can you just share with us about the whole debate, please?
Yeah, in the panel discussion that we had, the point I was making was something similar, that, the RSS, I think, has this long-term strategy of power without accountability. I think what we saw in this regime under Mr. Modi in the last 10 years is a similar model of governance, of centralizing power without accountability. So the question that now RSS is kind of pointing fingers into Modi regime in terms of arrogance and mismanagement. They have been equal partners for last 10 years. All institutions, and if the grapevine has it right, nothing could move without RSS under RSS watch. So I think having enjoyed power, having so closely aligned, and the entire agenda of Mr. Modi for last 10 years has been the RSS agenda. In fact, Mr. Modi's persona comes out of RSS training. So now for the RSS to turn guns and say that this is a regime, I think is not a fair thing, and that's a red herring. And we need to ask questions of RSS, that they need to be also accountable. I think the general RSS method has been that they evade being accountable. I think this last 10 years is a story of drawing an accountability. And therefore, in that panel discussion, I said that I'm not too keen to get into this contest between Modi and Yogi and RSS versus Modi. I think this is a red herring, simply to divert. The question is, RSS and Modi are together. The model that Mr. Modi presented in terms of certain crass cultural majorities with neoliberalism is an RSS social vision. And we need to, therefore, whatever has gone wrong is not an individual attribute. It is a systemic attribute born out of RSS social vision. And therefore, we need to ask questions of RSS that they need to be accountable. If they think they have gone wrong, then I think they are also partly or mostly to be blamed.
I will just ask one question from Mr. Mohan Rao. Dr. Mohan Rao has asked a question to Zoya and Ajay both. Thank you, Zoya and Ajay, for a very exhaustive analysis. My question is whether the Oasis Party or BSP helped BJP win in many seats they contested. The BJP also won a very large number of seats with very small margins. My second question pertains to whether the EVMs were in fact fixed, as many people have argued. This is the question by Mohan Rao, Dr. Mohan Rao. Both of you can take it up, please.
Thank you, Mohan. I think I cannot. Well, BSP probably BSP's presence has made a difference, and as you point out, the BJP lost by very narrow margins in several states, and I'm sorry, in several seats. Imagine if the BSP was part of the India bloc in UP, for example. So Congress, Samajwadi Party, and BSP. I think it's very, we can well, BJP may well have been down to 20-25 seats. So BSP probably did make some difference. It has benefited the BJP, but of course it has done so at its own expense. And as to Owaisi, what can one say about him? I mean, he has been contesting in Maharashtra and UP, Bihar. He doesn't win a single seat in any of these states, except possibly he has one in not MP, but an assembly seat in Maharashtra. I mean, he hasn't even done very well. He has, of course, won his own seat in Hyderabad, but outside of that, he has not been able to score anywhere. But he has probably divided the Muslim vote, but not to a very significant degree, because Muslims have, and I think have en bloc voted for the India bloc. And I think the Samajwadi Party in UP benefited from this, because the Congress was able to pull both the Dalit vote and the Muslim vote to the India bloc. And this may well have happened in some other states as well, for example, in Maharashtra, in Rajasthan, I think. So yes, I mean, overall, probably Owaisi has not, despite his best efforts, really damaged the India bloc in any significant way. But I would say BSP has, to some extent, damaged the India bloc in UP.
To add to that, one is to think in terms of the electoral damage. This is something very inexplicable as to why BSP should suddenly go silent, or why BRS shifted bulk of its vote to the BJP. I mean, there's something happening behind the scenes, that leaders with long track record, Mayawati, if she had played her cards right, for all you know, should have been the prime ministerial candidate for the India bloc. But the fact, the way she went silent, and BSP's vote share that they drew blank, it came below 7%, I think has to tell us something about the backhand or backroom machinations. As Machiavelli says, there is no modern politics without conspiracies. So I think one has to smell the coffee, and there is something more to this story than one can afford to say only in terms of social and political analysis. There is something happening which is kind of forcing some of these leaders to go silent. As for Mr. Owaisi, as Zoya rightly pointed out, electorally, I think the damage is very limited, and that I think all that credit goes to the Muslim community, that in spite of being in such duress, being pushed, and may I add, even regional parties like SP not standing with the Muslims during the Muzaffarnagar riots, Muslims en bloc have voted going beyond their Muslim identity to vote for Congress. Not that Congress also had done great in terms of the response to Muslim lynchings that have happened. In spite of all of that, I think Muslims stood solidly. But having said that, I think one has to take Mr. Owaisi's politics seriously. The fact that he thinks identity can be played up, I always say that Advani, Vajpayee had Shabuddin, and Mr. Owaisi is what Mr. Modi and Amit Shah have. That I think they aid in a certain imagination, and therefore we'll have to see that after a point, the identity is not a sufficient analysis. There is something called a ruling class. And that's what is happening, that Mr. Owaisi represents a certain kind of a ruling elite, and it has nothing to do with his Muslim identity. And that's the same with what I call as mezzanine elites with the OBCs and Dalits. I think this discourse needs to come to the forefront, that, in our question of representation, if we play our cards right, I think it needs to be qualified representation. Simply somebody being a Muslim is not a sufficient reason that he can represent Muslim community. Somebody being simply a Dalit is not. I think this populist turn has helped us to raise far more qualified questions, which is good. This shows what I refer to as populist possibilities, that if we can actually push the agenda much deeper, and I think, and we see a clear possibility that in Telangana, Muslims have not voted for Owaisi outside Hyderabad. That in spite of he going around campaigning, and there's a clear strategy of Mr. Owaisi to divide non-BJP votes, but Muslims have seen through this case. So this shows that on the ground, for common people cutting across religion and caste, they are willing to move beyond narrow identity. Somebody, Mr. Ravi Sinha, raised the question of secular sectarianism. So that's a clear a possibility of how communities can move beyond sectarian mobilizations. I think that's a clear possibility we need to take up from this electoral result.
Thank you. And there is a question by Abdul Mukhdir. Noting their decline and concerned about getting elected in the next elections, will BJP take hard actions to complete their agenda against Muslims and its isolation strategy? Is a question.
Sorry, what is the question? That they will continue with their anti-Muslim agenda?
Abdul Mukhtar is want to know, will BJP, noting their decline now and concerned about getting elected in next elections, will BJP take hard actions to complete their agenda against Muslims and its isolation strategy? Will they be able to take that strategy? That I think is what he wants to know. Are they constrained?
Well, I think BJP will not give up on its agenda. Whether they can achieve it is another matter. For example, the Uniform Civil Code is one issue. There are already rumblings of some dissent on that from its key allies who have said, for example, JDU, that they're not against a uniform civil code, but a uniform civil code should be based on consultation and consensus. But I think uniform civil code is not the only element. I think that BJP's politics and that of the Prime Minister over the last 10 years has been defined by its anti-Muslim stand, and that became very clear when this government, when the Prime Minister has gone out of his way to appoint Christian and Sikhs as cabinet ministers. For example, this Ravneet Singh Bittu in Punjab is lost the elections, and yet he's been appointed a minister of state when there was already one other Sikh in the cabinet, Hardeep Singh Puri, and yet they've appointed a second person, and likewise they've appointed a Christian in the cabinet. But the same would not be done with regard to Muslims. So I don't think we need greater evidence of continuity of their majoritarian and not just anti-minority, but more specifically anti-Muslim politics. But as I said, there are compulsions of coalition politics, and we have to see how those compulsions will play out in the days and months to come.
To kind of quickly add to that, only yesterday, Telangana witnessed after 15 years communal riots, disturbances between Hindus and Muslims in Medak district. And Zoya will recollect that as a member of Minority Commission, she had visited Telangana, Adilabad and Nizamabad, where some of our friends deposed before the commission. And Telangana was free of this, but now it's back. What does this signify? So I don't think so. This is going to be pursuing majoritarianism without a majority. As I said, this can be more ominous in terms of their strategies, because what they are not able to do through state and policy, they will compensate through social mobilization. So there is one possibility of growing social conflicts. How they would be engineered is something I see as one possibility that I think we need to keep a watch on. So there is no question of letting go. As I've also explained in my talk, that anti-Muslim agenda is important for BJP RSS, not merely to target Muslims, but that also gives them to do a lot of recalibrating within the dominant or majority Hindu community, that in terms of caste configurations, in terms of question of representation, in terms of neoliberal consensus, there is a lot that hinges on the anti-Muslim. So it's not merely a communal agenda, that it has a lot wider significance of, but the fact that people have not been responding to that anti-Muslim rhetoric so robustly, perhaps as they perhaps did in 2014, is a clear case of a ideological crisis of the Hindutva politics. So that's where they are stuck, that they are structurally dependent on this, but there is not that kind of a purchase on the ground. The only two options is they change or generate kind of conflicts which are kind of hysterical in nature.
I'm glad you're speaking of the ideological crisis of the right, because so far you've been telling us in all your talks and in your books about the ideological crisis of, including the talk today, of the ideological crisis of the opposition or of progressive and left of center politics. I think it's very important to note because I mean, it's not just that RSS and BJP and the right are always smart and they can get going on everything. They too are facing a crisis. And that crisis, I think, as you have probably said in your talk and comments, has to do with the neoliberal model. It has to do with the social and political model, which has come under the scanner.
Yes.
I mean, no doubt, I think you're right. There's a lot of support for it, but there is also a fair degree of robust opposition. And that is what I think is what makes this election so interesting, so fascinating. And also, as I said, hats off to the Indian people and to the Indian voters for the kind of verdict that they have delivered. Even as you say, it's not a clear verdict, yet there are some clear messages that the voter has given.
Absolutely, Zoya. I think this in all sense of them, this is a stupendous election. It began with a dull affair, but electorate have done such a fine job that it's also important that the opposition needs to rethink that why people, in spite of such deep economic crisis, are not giving them a clear mandate. And that's where I think the question is open for both ends. For RSS, I think there's a clear signal on the ground that people are not willing to go with a vitriolic, senseless agenda targeting certain communities in lieu of economic distress, growing unemployment, economic inequalities. People are not buying that anymore. That's the ideological crisis for the right, and the ideological crisis for the progressives and the opposition is really that in spite of such poor governance, in spite of such deep economic distress, people are not still willing to completely go. And that's where I say that is perhaps because of the cultural agenda that RSS continues.
No, I don't think it is only because of the cultural agenda. It has to do with the fact that this was a very unequal election. There was a very non-level playing field. Can you imagine such an unlevel playing field anywhere? I mean, if you look at the kind of money that was at their disposal, they had virtually, I mean, if there were 100 rupees being spent in the election, 90 rupees were spent by the BJP, apart from its total control over institutions. And let us not forget the Election Commission. The Election Commission simply was pliant, and I mean, and it really allowed the top leaders of the BJP to get away with blatant violation of the model code of conduct. And for the Election Commission to actually say in a press conference that we decided that we will not touch the top two. Firstly, there's equivalence between what the Prime Minister was saying and what Rahul Gandhi was saying. So apart from this false equivalence, if Rahul Gandhi was wrong, then you have to take action against him too. But to say that we will not touch the top two, so is it that the model code of conduct does not apply to the top leaders? So I think it was a very unlevel playing field, and therefore I think we have to take this into account when we say, well, the people do not vote. And if the media had not played the role it played, I mean, the media went on about 400 par, ab ro rahe hain media wale aur ab keh rahe hain ki haan humne usko zara zyada hype kar diya वगैरह वगैरह. But the fact of the matter is that they really hyped up this whole 400 par business, or aayega to Modi hi. So, that kind of, I mean, they added so much to the BJP campaign by acting virtually as the spokespersons of the BJP. So I think it was this control over money, media, and institutions made this a very unequal election. And if in such an unequal election, the opposition managed to get 234 seats, I think it's very significant. And it's not, as I think many of you are suggesting, not only because of the opposition, but the people, and how the people responded to if you will, the crisis of democracy, the danger to the constitution.
Niranjan Pant ji has asked some question in the chat box. I will request him to unmute himself and ask the question. Niranjan Pant. Anyway,
I would be grateful if you could read out my comment. It's not a question, in fact, it's a comment. But since you have given me the chance, I would like to compliment Ajay for his very insightful analysis of things. Once again, I have said it in my comments, and I hope people who matter listen to him. Work accordingly. I'd be grateful if you could read out my comments. I don't find them in my comment box somehow.
No, it's very much there. You said the INC drawing blank in Madhya Pradesh is symptomatic of their structural weakness. Unless the likes of Kamal Nath and Scindia's are purged, but the Scindia has purged himself. He's not. He's joined the BJP and he's a cabinet minister again. Scindia's are purged ruthlessly, regardless of their proximity to the INC's first family, and bright young alternative young leadership is promoted at all levels. There's little hope. I think that's the comment that I can read. But I can't see your comment about Ajay. I thought
There's another comment. No.
There.
There's another comment.
I can
Niranjan
read
ji.
comment. Niranjan Sahab said right at the beginning when Zoya was speaking, his comment came, and I will read it. It is premature to feel happy with BJP's reduced seats. It still is the biggest party with larger vote share, despite its poor economic performance, rampant crony capitalism. Equal concern must be given to continued failure of parties in opposition, which are increasingly becoming family boroughs of select few rather than well-knit political formation with strong grassroots organization. They have much to answer for their rather muted opposition to the facade of political religiosity of BJP and the persecution of minorities and of left-wing activists. That was his first comment.
There is no doubt that BJP is the single largest party. It has won 240 seats. But I think we have to assess that against the fact that they have been in, that they were expecting 300, 350 seats, and they've got 100 less and 63 less than what they had in 2019. That's not something that we can ignore, just as you are absolutely right. We cannot ignore the fact that they are a formidable political force. The combination of BJP and RSS is formidable. As to as to the point about family, no doubt the Congress party and regional parties, which are part of the India bloc, are family dominated. But so is the BJP. Barring the top leaders, look at the list of members of parliament and cabinet ministers who have been appointed, who belong to political families. So I think BJP is neither averse to family domination nor to corruption. It's very clear. So I think let's not think that BJP is above any of this. I think the electoral bonds has put pay to anything that they may say about their corruption and the number of tickets they've given to, and so happily they welcome political families into the party, suggests that their problem is really, no doubt their top leaders do not belong to political families, whereas in the case of the Congress, it is the Gandhi family is very dominant, and so are so many other parties. But I think I'm not sure whether this whole family and dynasty argument is cutting ice with people anymore.
Mr. RMP Jawahar has raised his hand and has shared some questions also. Please unmute yourself and share those queries.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the wonderful interactions. In fact, I think there are some elephants which we are missing in this room. Not one, maybe many. I would say that to assume that it's a fair and free election just because we got good results is not fair enough. I think the way in which the election commissioners were appointed right in the first place, and the way in which the schedules of the election has been cast, the way in which the MCC has been violated again and again by the Prime Minister, the way in which the electoral bond issue has been ignored by everyone, including the Supreme Court, the unequal share of money going to one party, and many, many things. So to assume that to discuss this as if it's a very good sort of a failure of Modi is to give him more credits. I think the results would have been much, much, much worse if the ECA has done its duty. It has failed to do the duty, and we cannot allow this to happen for the future of our country. That is number one point. Second is there is also another big dimension in terms of geographical pattern. The opposition today is truly representation of the country. It comes from the north, it comes from the south, it comes from the west, it comes from the east, and it comes from the biggest states, UP, West Bengal, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Kerala together. This is nearly in these four big states of the nation, 71% BJP is defeated. 70, that I think is a very big sort of hope that we need to count on. And there are little confusions in the middle states, especially when someone talked about Madhya Pradesh. I feel that Madhya Pradesh is a case of where EVM has worked clearly for them. It has worked for them in the assembly election. It has worked for them now. The third dimension which we have to talk about is the color of saffron has faded and the Hindi has become a little soft. We don't talk about Hindi, Hindutva, this thing that much. And the Ram has not worked and only the Jagannath has to help. That is as per the PM's own statement. And the fourth point is the unethical practices, I think, has cheated BJP more than the people. The unethical practices of everywhere, for buying opposition and resources and whatever that is, BJP got used to Chocobar and it ate the Charso bar very well. The fourth point is, even if it is a red herring, if the BJP RSS struggle is a red herring, the hounds has to be in action. It cannot ignore. The hounds cannot sleep. We need to be alert and we need to follow it, even a red herring. I think those are the things I think for the future discussions, it will be very useful to hear the experts' view and shape our actions. Thank you very much.
There are two questions for Ajay, one from Subrat Sarangi, but the first question I'm reading. My question for Comrade Ajay, a follow-up of Comrade Ravi's question. I agree that the left liberals' work in the cultural front at national level has been weak, except for the work in today's scenario. Can you please give some indications of possible experiments and actions that the left has taken up or can take up in the cultural front? And there is another question from Padma, which is
Subhash Padma's question, which Kisla has posted, is for Professor Ajay. Why the difference between role of civil society in North and South India?
Yeah, please. Ajay, please.
Yeah, so the first question is, again, I think in terms of culture and left politics, I've already partly addressed it when I was addressing Mr. Ravi's question, that it is because of conceptual and theoretical reasons in the past, the way progressives have aligned with a certain idea of modernity, and that we feel that we have given up that entire culture. By default, we seem to be equating with conservatism. There is no doubt that culture continues to have popular prejudices. There are conservative elements, but to equate all of culture, all of religion, all of caste, all of ethnic and linguistic identities with some certain kind of conservatism is where I think progressives and left has by and large gone wrong. That I think the same cultural resources also have deep-seated collective resources for ideas of solidarity, ideas of everyday ethics, ideas of interdependence. Look at even Delhi riots, the way Hindus and Muslims protected each other. So through lay normativity in everyday transactions, people do have, I think, greater notions of solidarity. The point is that the left and the progressives need to really bank on those everyday lay normative clues that we get, and try to kind of mobilize communities, construct communities around it. What is Bhakti tradition? What is the tradition of Kabir, for instance? India has huge, great traditions that of syncretic culture, the Dargah culture, the Sufi culture. I mean, every state has great amount of popular culture. The problem with the opposition parties has been that they have exclusively mobilized on the political front. This has a long tradition. It goes back to Gandhi and colonial period. I will not get into all of that. But the problem has been with opposition, progressive, left forces in India, that they have exclusively looked at power dynamics through a political lens, through the lens of modernity, and therefore left all of culture free only for RSS to articulate. And that is the work they have been doing for last 100 years of reaching out smaller castes. Today, RSS is reaching out to smaller tribes in central India. The BJP's electoral results comes at the back of back-breaking work of RSS on the ground, and that is in terms of reconfiguring a lot of cultural equations. The new hold that they have got in tribal areas in Gujarat, in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, is that they're aligning local deities of the tribes into the Hindu fold. They're aligning a lot of local cultural practices and spinning a new cultural Hinduized pan-Indian narrative, and people are feeling a sense of inclusion. People are feeling a sense of inclusion, and rather than people are feeling a sense of colonization from the outside. So I think that is a field where we need to really focus on that. What are the cultural resources? For instance, Romila Thapar in her book on dissent says that dissent is in the collective consciousness of Indian subcontinent. That from Buddha onwards is a question of dissent. But we never kind of attuned ourselves. We never kind of used that kind of symbolism in our political mobilization. So that, I think, has been a great limitation which right has kind of built on. We need to make a course correction, and I think need to get more comfortable with a cultural and local cultural idiom, even as we question the prejudices, exclusions, and otherization that is part of the same cultural repertoire. And what was the second question? I forgot. Somebody asked Padma.
North-South.
What is why the role, difference in roles of civil society in North India and South India?
Well, that's $1 million question. I have myself asking this question. What can possibly explain south of India's? Obviously, the post-colonial history, I think one has to go back and read early modern history to actually see that why this difference gap has. One immediate reason that I can think in popular register is that South has always been cautious because there has been a certain appropriation of the idea of the nation by the North. The first 8 prime ministers came squarely from Uttar Pradesh alone. So I think North suffered from this over-complacent attitude of owning the nation. South has always been skeptical of the Indian nation-state idea, not in terms of being secessionist as BJP would want us to believe, but in terms of skeptical of its share. So I think there has been a lot of emphasis in the South. If you look at the early industrialization that happened in Indore, for instance, all those industries moved to Tamil Nadu. They moved to Pune. The automobile industry, for instance, moved to Pune. So I think, and second, I think independent social mobilization. I think social reform movements have had a long tradition in the South. Of course, North also had Kabir, but look at each area. Basava tradition in Karnataka, Narayan Guru in Kerala, Vemana in Telangana. Every place I think had, and these figures have remained in the popular mobilization. That's the key part. That there has been a continuity, and of course, left politics. Left of all hues, South continues to have the presence of left politics. Left completely died out in the North, but left in Telangana, of radical left to official left to electoral parliamentary left, whatever denominations you might use, left has had continued presence. Dravidianism in Tamil Nadu. Of course, even those are cracking up now because Dravidianism now we are realizing has benefited certain OBC castes, no, not benefiting others. And those are the entry points BJP is strongly working on. So I wouldn't be surprised if BJP gets a stronghold in Telangana and Tamil Nadu in coming decades.
Can I just add to what has just been said on this North-South division? I think to put it very telegraphically, there's 3 points. One is that the South has had a history of social movements from below, the anti-caste movements in Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, whereas the caste movements and caste politics in the North has been from above. It's been state-driven and it's focused mainly on representation. 2, partition has had a profound impact on North India. Partition had virtually no impact in the South. Hence, the Hindu-Muslim question, which has really been so important in the North, was not important in South India at all. We cannot understand the North-South difference without taking into account the importance and consequences of partition and the absence of it in the South. 3, I think very importantly, South India, for a variety of reasons, I think social development was given much greater importance than it has been in the North. And then finally, I think the point that we are repeatedly making, that why is it that the BJP RSS is able to do what it is doing? Please, let's not forget, the BJP and the RSS is using state machinery. It is using state machinery for the promotion of Hindu culture and Hindu identity. So to say that BJP is able to do it and the opposition is not able to do it, I think we have to take into account the role of the state in the promotion of Hindu identity and Hindu culture in the last 10 years. So I think the North-South issue is very, very important, but it's obviously, it cannot be separated from the very different histories of the North and the South.
Professor Shekhar Ramakrishnan had shared a question in the chat box. I read that the Indian economy doubled under 10 years of Modi, about 7% annual increase in real GDP. I may be wrong. Is the income inequality that Professor Hasan talked about the reason this did not lead to BJP success? What was the change in real income outside of the top 10%, especially in UP? If there was in fact improvement for the bottom 90%, the results are even more dramatic as a verdict on Hindutva.
I couldn't agree more. I think this huge and unprecedented increase in inequality is certainly a matter of concern. In fact, this election is very interesting because for the first time, inequality figured prominently in this election. So certainly, I think what you're saying about, but I don't know if in UP even 10% have benefited, but yes, I mean the vast majority hasn't really gained that much. And really speaking, I mean, there is no evidence of very significant or substantial economic development in the last 7 years that BJP, I mean, the double engine Sarkar in UP. I mean, there are a lot of MOUs and economic summits that have taken place in Lucknow. But there's a difference, but whether any of this is really translating on the ground, yes. I mean, infrastructure, perhaps yes. There is because this government and this particular right-wing party, as indeed right-wing parties in most parts of the world, focus on infrastructure. And so they have focused on highways and airports and so on and so forth. And in UP too, some of that infrastructure, particularly roadways and expressways, and that's the big, I mean, if we call economic development, then economic development is essentially infrastructure development. I'm not aware of any big industry coming to UP. And in fact, interestingly enough, there is a great deal of resentment in terms of whatever economic development is taking place, whatever contracts are being given, a lot of them have gone to Gujaratis. So apparently, even in Varanasi, one is hearing that there was a great deal of resentment that all the Kashi corridor and all of what is happening there by way of development, most of it has really gone to Gujaratis, and people are now openly, for the first time, actually, which they did not say for the last 6 to 7 years, but are openly saying that there's resentment of that.
Vinod Mumbai has raised some question in the chat box. Please unmute yourself, Vinod, and share your comment and question.
Thank you, Subhash. Yeah, it's very excellent discussion, presentation by Zoya ji. I have 2 comments and a small question at the end. My comments are, firstly, Zoya pointed out correctly the difference between North and South with respect to the partition. I know it from my own family. I was born in Lahore, and I was in 1st grade when the partition occurred, and we came to Delhi eventually after going through refugee camps, etc. But I witnessed the takeover of Delhi. I used to think in my school and college days that BJP was a phenomenon of the Punjabi Hindu community that had migrated and taken hold of Delhi. That BJP reflected nothing more than the whole, and that immense amount of resentment at having lost whatever they did, etc., etc. I used to hear that in family discussions every day. And to the south, when I grew up and worked in Bombay and other places, they were totally oblivious of the fact that whether, partition had happened or meant anything. And I think this is what we see probably as a reflection in the politics that has emerged since then. The second comment I have is that to think of culture in terms of religious identity alone is, I think, not quite comprehensive. I came through culture in the left movement 60, 65 years ago through institutions like IPTA, Indian People's Theatre Association, through many other, the Bhakti Sufi movement, Ganga, Jamna, Tehzeeb, etc. And I think that was a part of culture too. Maybe it has been neglected in recent years and it can be taken up again, etc. But I think that's a dimension that to think of culture exclusively in terms of religious identity, etc., is, I think, a limitation and doesn't reflect the diversity of the country. The only question I have is regarding corruption and what was revealed or has been talked about in the difference between the exit poll results and the actual results later, even if EVM, etc., played a role. The exit poll results led to some huge amount of money being made in stock market manipulation, and I've heard and read stories of that. Of course, as I'm removed many thousand miles from India, I only get to see a few stories, not completely. But this corruption seems to have been something that might emerge much bigger in the future. affecting many, other aspects of Indian governance. So I just like if there is any speaker has a comment on this corruption of money making in stock market manipulation between the exit poll and the actual poll. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation.
I think the stock market scam, as it has been called, in relation to the exit polls, I think that has, that issue has been raised, and there is some debate on manipulation of the stock market, thanks to the advice that was given by the top leaders of the BJP that they should buy shares before the results, on the assumption that BJP is going to win by a landslide. So I think there are some questions that, for example, the Congress party has raised, that Rahul Gandhi raised in his press conference, and also Praveen Chakravarty, who's the head of the Congress, Professional Congress, has, I think, raised some very important issues. Now, whether, but that needs to be investigated, and then only can we really come to any understanding whether there was actual manipulation to benefit foreign investors and at the expense of Indian investors. I think those are questions that need to be investigated. But there is there was obviously something that was not quite right about the rise and fall of the stock market from 31st May to the 4th of June.
There is a question for Ajay from Mr. Tanveer Azad. If majoritarianism goes on without majority, there surely would be a problem of location of power and culpability. Is it more dangerous than the previous regime? Ajay.
Yes, Tanvir, as I argued that there is that possibility that majoritarianism being supported by a majority goes with this halo of creating a monolithic majoritarian identity around the Hindu identity. But today that kind of blew apart. That consolidation is staggered. That's more complex, as I explained. It's more in terms of sense of belonging rather than an interest in othering and targeting Muslims. So this will be a crisis. This is something that as I've explained in my talk, I see ominous possibilities, because the BJP and RSS have to try to crawl their way back to building that kind of an old momentum they had from 2014 in terms of this vitriolic rhetoric against religious minorities. Now that the momentum is lost, you have a vulnerable state. The only way it can claim back that kind of a solidity, I'm afraid, might have some ominous possibilities. So we need to keep a close watch. As I said, Telangana's example, the Telangana which did not witness communal disturbances for last 15-20 years is back suddenly in terms of disturbance by Hindu and Muslims in Medak, which is a district adjoining the city of Hyderabad. So this could be one method, but will this really work? What would be the consequences if people don't respond positively to this kind of polarized agenda, which can be socially pushed rather than in terms of state institutions? These are all very important questions that one has to wait and watch. But as I said, as a preliminary point, I think we are in an ominous situation, and the way the state would respond could be something that one has to keep a close watch on.
I will ask Ravi to raise this question. We are moving toward conclusion. Please, Ravi, can you just?
No, I usually keep away after asking the first question, but today Ajay has inspired me enough to come back in. I have, Ajay, we have discussed in NSI in last 2-3 years many of the issues relating to Bhakti movement, the lay culture, popular culture on ground, as well as political developments which have affected especially North India, as Zoya ji is pointing out, partition and so on. And I hope you don't mind if I say that maybe you are putting too much hope into this, what is known as lay culture at the ground level, syncretism, Sufism, Bhakti movement, and so on. Bhakti movement especially, we have discussed a lot, and it may have played great social reformist role in its time, but the civilizational consequences of Bhakti movement for the civilization on the subcontinent, we raise a lot of questions about that. It is not the fault of left that Kabir Panthis have shrunk, do not exist in any significant manner in North India. So, that they are just, sitting in some sects and some mathas and so on. It is not the fault of left and progressives and liberals and rationalists that BJP took, or the first doorway to BJP into South India was through the land of Basava. Karnataka was taken over. So there are deeper questions, I feel, which we cannot discuss today. Why Ramcharitmanas and Tulsidas can travel far and wide without the help of RSS, and why Kabir cannot travel as far and wide, even if all of left comes together in his support. There are deeper questions, and many at times when in the intellectual circles, people eulogize Gandhi's kind of secular religiosity, or when they talk of India's tolerance and plurality and so on, I think, the need is felt that how to confront the fascist communal kind of onslaught. But the hope that is posited on these syncretic Sufi so-called pluralist things, I think is overblown, because it is, there was a good historical reasons why they have been marginalized, and the mainstreaming of Tulsidas and Ramcharitmanas and all the Saguna gods with form, and all these avatars, they travel much more easily, in North as well as South, but more so in North, more so in the lay culture, more so among the poor subaltern people. There are deeper reasons, I believe, for that, and this hope for roping in or deploying some kind of syncretic Sufist Bhakti kind of a stream, I am afraid to say that it's not going to work. So in again, I am opening Pandora's box, but my rough understanding is that when it comes to people and elections and politics of the day, we will have to go over to their more material interest. And when it comes to culture, we have to tackle this question that why is educated middle class in the grip of BJP? And the left's intervention in the cultural domain doesn't have to, we should not choose the difficult field to fight the adversary. We should not go to the people on the cultural plank. We should go to people on class and economic and material planks, and the cultural plank should come from top, and they can't confront us there. From top means, where we can create an educated young generation that is so culturally evolved and so trained that they cannot be recruited into the fascist Hindutva army. So again, that's a long debate. Hopefully you will agree to come back again and we can have extend this debate. But I think that this expectation on Sufism, on pluralism, on Indian, proverbial Indian tolerance and so on, we will have to rethink all that. India was not all that great, given all these pluralist cultures and so on. After all, we threw away Buddhist, we killed Charvakas, we did all kinds of things. India was not that plural. It was plural, but it was very infighting plural, killing each other, marginalizing each other, doing all kinds of things, that kind of plurality we had, but a tolerant plurality, a spiritual plurality, we did not have.
Okay, so a quick response, that the first part I completely agree with you. In fact, I've only last month I wrote a piece in the Frontline, which I would share with you, where I've kind of traced this history of Sufism and why it doesn't work in contemporary modern context. But there are certain clues, but as you rightly pointed out, it doesn't really transform, and they don't really give us ready-made solutions. So that's on that part I fully comply and agree with you. But on the second part, I think I have very steep disagreement that not to enter culture and culture to be confronted through economic issues, I think is a very top-down approach, is very statist in its character, and that has been, I think, a key limitation of left thinking in Indian context. I think if historically one looks at culture is getting foreground, and not just in India, culture is getting foreground across world. Look at Turkey, look at even United States, even Europe, culture questions have come back. This has something to do with social democratization, that loosening up of hierarchies, a greater coming together, I think has something to do with why cultural questions are coming back. The way globalization pushed in cultural questions, right? Of immigrants coming in, people feeling lack of sense of belonging, globalization in terms of its post-Westphalian model. So I think there are complex historical and conceptual reasons as to why culture is getting foregrounded. I don't think left progressive forces can really afford to demarcate culture from economic issues. Today, if you look at right, it's part of its success story is that many of its economic policies are culturally framed. Look at Ujjwala. They don't simply say it's Ujjwala is gas. They link that Ujjwala to women's roles. They link that to family health. They take each of their economic policy, social policy. They're all culturally led. The moment you frame culturally, its reach, manifold increases. People are able to identify in their own local cultural idiom. I think we have to confront this massification of democracy. This is a positive move towards democratization. It may not align with our idea of progressiveness. It's our idea of liberalism, our idea of tolerance and syncretic culture. But this definitely has huge amount of possibilities to kind of renew our thinking in terms of what new forms of solidarity will look like. So I think on that we should, as you rightly pointed out, have a longer debate as to what should be the place of culture among progressives. What does progressive culture look like? What are the historical and theoretical tools to it? Is bang on the question that we should pick up at some point later. Once we celebrate this relief that we have got, I think we can do that at some point.
We are finally moving towards conclusion of this meeting. I thank Professor Zoya Hasan and Professor Ajay Gudavarthy for sparing their time and sharing their views. And we would like to listen more from them, both of them. And we would like to invite Ajay again, because he has written a lot about it, and he didn't get much time also because of the panel discussion, because of the nature of the discussion. So we can listen to him more. But thank you both of you again, and thank you all the participants for.
Subhash, don't forget that we can have Zoya ji's n number of times.
Yeah, that is understood. That is understood. Yeah, she's yeah. So thank you once again, all the participants, for joining the debate. And
okay, thanks to all the participants.
Thank you very much.
Bye Zoya. Bye.
It was a great discussion. Thank you very much.